Good evening and welcome to the new Canaan Library. A couple of housekeeping notes. Note the exits in the rear of the auditorium, and please take a moment to silence your phones. Tonight's special because while Sheinelle Jones is about to take her book on a national tour, we are her very first stop. Our program reached max capacity in just a couple of days with a very long waiting list, so we're really happy that you're here. And we know it's because it's clear that she means to us who show up for the kind of storytelling that really matters. Sheinelle Jones is the co-host of Today with Jenna and Sheinelle on NBC, a face and voice that many of us wake up with each morning. But long before the book existed, she was hosting Through Mom's Eyes, a digital and broadcast series for Today, where she interviewed the mothers of celebrities to discuss their journeys raising successful children. What she discovered, though, was that she wasn't just making good television. She was conducting something closer to a masterclass in parenting. And she was doing it for herself, for her own 3 kids, quietly taking notes along the way. She asked Lin-Manuel Miranda's mom about staying present with kids while balancing a demanding career. She talked with Lady Gaga's mom about how to recognize bullying. She got tips from Steph Curry's mom on making sure even future NBA royalty does the dishes. Dozens of conversations, each one honest, warm, and utterly human. To help us explore these stories, we're so lucky to have Liz Vaccariello as our moderator this evening. Liz has spent more than 30 years in publishing, setting the creative vision for legendary media brands, including Parents, People, Real Simple, and Reader's Digest. She's an award-winning editor and the author of 9 best-selling books. But beyond her extraordinary resume, Liz is a mother herself of twins, and someone who has spent her entire career thinking about how we tell the stories about the way we live. Liz interviewed Sheinelle for her podcast, What Matters with Liz, and it airs this week, so please tune in for some more conversation. So considering their shared expertise, we're in for a remarkable conversation tonight. So you submitted your questions for Sheinelle, and she'll answer some of them at the close of the conversation. I'll bring a hand mic to you and call out your name if your question was chosen. Then we're gonna help Sheinelle with her book wedding, as she calls it. We're gonna take a really fun group shot. Our photographer will jump on the stage and we'll all hold up our books and take it from the perspective of Sheinelle and Liz at the front. Then Sheinelle will sign books in the back. So we're gonna ask everyone to remain seated so that she has a clear and swift path to get back to the book table to keep the line moving. Thank you for your cooperation with that. So welcome to the Mom Village. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to Sheinelle Jones and Liz Vaccariello.
Oh my goodness.
One's on.
Okay, but then you need it.
But I figured out how to turn it.
Oh, okay. Oh, there you go. I was saying thank you, and then someone gave me their handkerchief, and it's in my pocket. And hopefully it's not used, because I'll probably use it. But this is special, too. I'll save my hanky. My first book tour date with you guys. Yep. Okay.
Sheinelle, congratulations
Thank
on
you.
your first book.
Thank you.
I was the editor-in-chief of Parents Magazine 10 years ago, and I was on the Today Show, and I did, I think it was like Best Toys for Christmas, and Sheinelle was one of the anchors that I did it with, and I remember we had done several segments together over the years, but you took me aside and you were talking about Parents Magazine, because you were so, I love that magazine, and I'm so fascinated by motherhood and parenthood, and I'm thinking, and this is like how you were talking, you're like, I think I want to start a series about the mothers of extraordinary people, because I find that fascinating, this job that's so important. And I remember that conversation. Wow. You went on to launch that series, and here we are 10 years later, and that series became a book. And so I want to hear all about it. But first question is, what about those interviews made you think there's more than just these 5-minute or 10-minute interviews? There's something deeper, and I want to be part of that conversation.
Wow. So when I got the job at the Today Show, I moved to New York with 2 triple strollers and a double stroller. My twins were 2, my oldest was 5. I was waking up at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, and it was overwhelming. It was a lot. And I think, a lot of people would think you get to the Today Show and you're like, I made it, Mama, I made it, But when I got there, it was pretty intimidating. I mean, you had all of these, these greats walking around the halls. I remember seeing Tom Brokaw in the elevator, and I'm like, ugh. And I went to Northwestern, and we did this project with him, but I knew he wouldn't remember me. But it felt I don't know, it felt like the Harvard of the network, of networks. And so I felt like, okay, what is my place? Like, what can I contribute to this, dynasty? It's what it felt like. And I remember there was a day where I'm always kind of the resident mama mentor to some of the interns and the pages, the ones with the navy blue blazers. And it got to the point where I was like, I can't meet you for lunch, but if you want to come over to my house while I'm making dinner, I can help you there, right? So true story, one of the pages, I hope that's allowed, was at my house. And she took the navy blue blazer off. And she was like, you're always helping us with your hopes and dreams. What would you want to do? I said, honestly, when Steph Curry comes in and everybody's looking at Steph Curry, I would just want to interview his mom. Like, how did she do it? What did she do right? What would she do differently? And I said, and maybe if I picked 30 women of people we love and are amazing, maybe I could find some magic thread or magic sauce. I need help. I just want their wisdom. And she was like, you should go for it. And I'm like, you think? And she's like, yeah, just do it. And at the time she was like, just do it for digital. And I was like, digital? I am a broadcast news journalist. What are you talking about, digital? And little did we know, the kiddos just passed all of us. And so when I went to the bosses and I said, hey, can I do this digital series? They were like, digital? And they were like, sure. And so we called, I was like, let's just go for it. Let's just see. And so we called Steph Curry's mom, Sonia Curry, and she was like, I love you. I watch you, and absolutely, I would love to do that. And the rest is history. So I was like, okay, now what? So I went to one of my favorite producers and I said, hey, I can't really pay you, but would you just on the side come do this project with me? And she was like, sure. So we flew to Steph Curry's house where he grew up. They were still there at the time. And I sat on her couch, and the rest is history. I mean, when she started talking about how, her husband played for the NBA, and people were looking at Steph, and it was his big game, first game of 8th grade, and everybody was ready to watch him play, and she wouldn't let him play because he didn't do his chores the night before. And I was sitting there, and I'm like, oh, I have 2 boys that play soccer. I would have cracked and said, do it when you get home or whatever. He had to tell his coach that he didn't do the dishes the night before. And I thought, God, did my mom send you because she thinks I'm a softie, So then I thought, okay, that's it. I went home, I'm like, guys, chores for everybody. Steph Curry had chores for everybody. And then on the other end of the spectrum, I interviewed Rob Gronkowski's mom, Gronk, as we say. And I was like, so I know that chores are a big thing, And she was like, ugh. She was like, don't buy white carpet if you don't want stains, please. She was like, if it's messy, just close the door. So I'm like, okay. So clearly there is no one right way. But I fell in love with the series because even in Steph Curry's old bedroom at the time, it was still intact, his trophies. He had this poster of Shaq on the wall. And I'm like, it was like a vision board before there were vision boards. Our high school bedrooms were sometimes our vision boards. I had news ladies on my wall. I had Janet Jackson on one wall. I had the Falcon that I took from the homecoming hallway at Heights in Wichita. It's like, I know where the Falcon is. It's in my bedroom, across the ceiling. And so I do think that a lot of us had these vision boards before it was a thing. And so it just turned into, once they realized that I wasn't trying to get any kind of gotcha on their kids and that I genuinely just wanted to hear from them, I didn't realize that she had a Montessori school. She had her own school. She certainly didn't have to work. Her husband was in the NBA, but it was important to her to have something of meaning for her. And so they would trek an hour and a half to school every day, each way. And I was feeling bad that my kids are in the city and they're traveling 30 minutes to school. And I'm like, okay, well, Steph did an hour and a half every day, each way, you know. And so it started with Steph Curry. And she must have called somebody because then Shaq's mom did it, and then Lady Gaga, and then Lin-Manuel Miranda, and then Venus and Serena, and then Carrie Underwood, and then Thomas Rhett. It was just like all of a sudden they were all just saying, sure, Sheinelle, like we'll sit down and we'll have these conversations. And it has been, to date, the most fulfilling thing I could have ever done, because I think I started out with the X's and O's of parenting. You know, Thomas Rhett's mom, she was divorced, and my mom's been divorced twice, and so I talked to her about being a part of a blended family and what that was like. And when she made the comment that you have to keep it positive and, you know, not to say anything negative about the other, I can validate for that, because I, to this day, have never heard my mom say a negative word about my dad. And they got divorced when I was little. They were college sweethearts to this day. And so I know divorce can be challenging, but it doesn't have to be so nasty, you know? And at the time, my kids were having all these play dates, and it was like, okay, we got to drop them off at the dad's house, and then now we got to go over to, you know, and it was just, and I'm watching the kids in the middle. And so there were all these things that I noticed, and I thought, you know what? I want to put that in a book, and I would love to write about that. And you can't put it in a 2 or 3 minute segment. And so over the years, I thought, you know what if I just take everything I've learned and see if there could be a there. And now we have it.
It's one of the most, I think, interesting parts of this book is the way you approached it. It's you weave your sort of thoughts about what the mother was saying almost in the moment, and then some reflections after the interview and how it changed you and affected your parenting. It's a lovely approach as a writer. So congratulations. So motherhood, moms, right? It's universal. We all have one. Many of us are trying to be good ones. And what do you think, but yet, as you write in the book, it's the role that we're least prepared for, right? So that's what part of the genius also of this is what can I learn, a little bit of how to. What is it, do you think, about motherhood that matters so much to children and to people? What is it about the mom?
I think a relationship with a mom can be complicated. I started the book by saying, you know, there's some study, and when we talk about Academy Awards, mom was thanked more than God. And I was like, sorry, God, I'm sure he understands. But people have, you know, for better or worse, a powerful relationship with their mothers. And at its best, it can be, as you all know, one of the most endearing, life-changing, heartwarming, powerful things. But I also recognize that people have complicated relationships with their mothers. I interviewed Alma Wahlberg, who was one of my favorites, and she passed after we interviewed. And I loved Alma Wahlberg. She was tinier than me. She and Matthew McConaughey's mom, Kay, were the tiny ones. And they were the biggest Spitfires, dynamos, and she was spunky. She talked about how when they would sneak out of the window, they thought that she didn't see. And one night she's like driving in the car looking for him, and she found one of them, and one of them, probably Mark, like hiding behind a bush, and she jumped over and pulled him up. You know, and this woman is like smaller than me, and I'm 4'11", and I just admired her spunk and her grit. I forgot the question. Shoot.
What is it about the mom?
Oh, yeah.
That in our life, this is the...
Yeah, and so, I know. Well, because Alma, when she realized that we just had this, like, I loved her, she loved me, and it was just so special. And we were way over time, and I missed the first flight, and I stayed, you know. And I remember walking up to her house, and I was like, man, I remember New Kids on the Block. Like, if I would have told my high school self that I'm, like, walking up to her door, like... You know, but anyway, so we were sitting there and we were talking, and one, it was endearing to me because she had all of these albums, you know, and like now we have all these, you know, digital pictures, but she just had good old-fashioned albums and so many kids. She was a true matriarch, but she had a very, very brutal childhood. And when she realized, I think she didn't plan on talking to me about it, but then when she realized, I really do want to know the good, the bad, the hard, she opened up to me and she was like, I was hungry. I dealt with parents who were alcoholics, and I didn't know sometimes if I was going to eat. She was like, I would go in the kitchen, and if there was a pot on the stove, she was like, that meant dinner. And if not, I'm on my own, and she talked about how hard it was. And so then when she had kids, she just wanted to do it differently. And a lot of people do that, right? A lot of us do that, where we take what we liked about our childhoods and then we do something different. And when I talked with Alma and she was so honest, that was when I realized this can have depth too. Sure, chores, sure, sibling rivalry and competition, but these women have a story to share. And she, at the time, she was an avid journaler. And she had these journal entries on these loose leaf papers. And she said, would you like to read some? And I said, well, no, my mom journals, and I've never asked to read my mom's journals. And she said, well, I want my kids to know what I said and what I think. I would want them to know what I thought about this or that. And so she said, can I read some for you? So she read some, and then she gave me some of her journal entries. And I'm like, I just felt like, what am I going to do? These are so powerful. These are so special. And so obviously on the Today Show, I didn't really talk about her journal entries, but she passed. And I felt she'd asked me to share. And so I actually called Mark and I said, hey, I have your mom's, some of her entries, how would you feel? And he said, I trust you, go for it. And so I put a little bit of it in the book, and you'll see it in the book. She just talks about how, sure, I raised these famous kids, but I kind of want them to know me and to know what I went through so that they know that they too can be great moms in spite of, and I thought that was so powerful, so powerful.
You actually write that in the book, that you began this journey thinking motherhood was all about the kids, that you'd be learning about the kids, but by the end you realized something surprising. Self-preservation is actually at the root of strong parenting.
It's so true. People ask me if there is a common thread with all of these women, and the one thing I know for sure is that part of it. I asked at the end of the interview, is there anything you would want women to know, whether they're empty nesters or whether they are still in the diaper phase? What would you want women to know? And they all talk about, one, giving yourself grace, of course, but also not to forget to pour into yourself. Shaq's mom, she doesn't talk a lot about it, but she was an alcoholic for a while. And she dealt with it quietly, and he had gotten into the NBA, and she at one point thought, he's come so far, I gotta get it together. I wanna be here for him, I wanna root for him. They're so close, he knows I'm trying, but I'm gonna kick this for him. And she did. She said one time he looked up at her, and in her mind she had sunglasses on, and she thought, you know what? I'm gonna be better, And then she talked to me about how it's never too late to pivot. If there's something that you don't like about yourself, or if she went and got her degree in her 40s. Wanda Durant, Kevin Durant's mom, said the same thing. She was a single mom, a young mom, and she said, I used to hide behind my boys, and I would take them to their practices, and I would pour into them. And when they left, moved on to the NBA, I didn't know who I was. She was like, I would look into the mirror, and I'm like, who am I? And so they all said, if we could encourage women to think about who they are in the process and not to forget about who they are, that it makes it a little bit easier. And I say that, but, they also talked about being present and not wishing it away. It's easy when you have, you're in the early phase, and some of you may remember in the diapers, and you're just like, oh my God, I just can't wait until I get out of this phase. And the next thing you know, you're in the terrible twos, and you're like, oh my God, I can't wait until I get out of this phase, Or I'm in this, I've got 3 teenagers now, and you're like, oh my gosh, this kid is so moody, I just can't wait, And then before you know it, they're out of the house. Where's Willie and Christina? You get one that's out of the house, you know what I mean? It goes by so quickly. And so I remember talking to Rob Gronkowski's mom, and I said, I just want to take a shower without somebody opening the door. And she chuckled, and then she goes, you're going to miss the pitter-patter. You might want somebody to open that door. She used to buy, and I talk about it in the book, she would buy half a cow because she had 5 boys. They all ended up playing professional sports. And she would go to the grocery store with 2 grocery carts, and she'd sit them in the little things, and she would push them, and she would have one of the boys push the other. Can you imagine? And then going to the butcher and getting half a cow and chopping it up and putting it in the freezer. I was like, no, for real, half a cow? And she's like, oh yeah, half a cow. And then I laughed, and then I said, do you miss it? And she started crying. And she was like, I do. So I was changed by that. I got home, and I'm like, okay, this is a lot. And I started this, project thinking I was going to get X's and O's of chores and no chores, but this is so much deeper than that for me. And then, as you guys know, my life got turned upside down. And as I was writing it, Uche got diagnosed, my husband got diagnosed with brain cancer, And so I'm like, God, this is not cool. Like, why would you, I finally have this like dream job. I've got the kids I've always wanted. I've got the Today Show. Like, really? I'm writing this book, really? And so I remember putting it down and I'm just like, you know what, this is not the time. And I talk about in the first couple of pages of the book, I had to rewrite it a little bit after he passed, because it was supposed to come out last spring. And he woke up from his first brain surgery. And I was like on the right side. And he looked over at me and he was like, "Where's your laptop?" I was like, "What?" I was like, "Are you okay? Like, are you?" And he's like, "No, where's your laptop? Where is it?" I'm like, "I don't care where my laptop is, But he wanted me to keep writing. And so there would be days where he would be in the hospital, a lot of days. And he would be in the bed and I would just be typing. And he would look over at me and I'm still typing. And I remember there were days where we would get home and it was tough. There was one day in particular I was really low and I was working on the chapter with Venus and Serena's mom, Oracene Price. And she's a tough cookie, like tough. But you think about it and it's like there's so much attention on their dad and Richard and the movie, and rightly so. But if you think about it, they had other siblings, they had other sisters. How did we think all of that happened? How was dinner on the table when they got home from their matches and practice and all the things? Because she was holding it down at home and she was a tough cookie. She had this rule where when they got home, no talk of tennis. We'll talk about family, we'll talk about God. She was super into her faith, She said, but we're not. And she goes, and tell these parents, the screaming, I know your boys play soccer, the screaming parents, they have to stop it. She was like, I can tell you so many kids who are really good at tennis. The Venus and Serena were looking at those kids and they dropped out because they were tired of hearing their parents nagging and screaming. And I thought, okay, this kind of stuff should be in a book. But I bring it up because she also, a lot of people don't know, they lost a sister. She lost a child when she was older. And I asked her about it and she tapped gently on it and she talked a little bit about grief and how, she has to carry it with her. And little did I know that probably 7 years after I talked with her, that I would be in that same position. And so as I'm typing the words to this chapter, it was like ministering back to me. Same thing with Wanda Durant. I start the chapter, you'll see, where I talk about the power of single moms and how I love single moms. My mom was one twice. And little did I know now I was gonna be one, So I can't make it make sense, and yet it makes sense. It's like this book was the comfort that I didn't know I would need. And so what Liz was just saying, what I thought was going to be kind of a gentle book about parenting ended up being so much more, because I realized that we're tough cookies and that we're stronger than we know. And sure, I love the pink and I love the nurturing and I love the softness of it, but we're also strong and we're also like tough, and we can jump out of a window and go find a kid and pull him out of a bush, and be this big. I love the juxtaposition of the two things. I find it so powerful. And so as I was writing this book and I shared it with Uche and he would read the chapters, it just felt like I was doing the right thing. And then I promised him that I would complete it, and I sent it to Grandmama because she was gonna do the book tour with me. And then 7 months after Uche, she passed on me and we just did not see it coming. But she was so excited to do this with me. So I'm doing it, I'm in it, yeah.
You've learned to become, or maybe you've always become, very present in your life. And you write about it in the book through an anecdote when you were carrying a baby. You want to tell that story?
I was carrying Clara. I was on maternity leave. At the time, I was a morning anchor in Philadelphia at the Fox station. And I was on maternity leave, and we were probably maybe a month out. And I had all three of them at home. Kyan, I don't know what he was doing, poor kid. He was 3, he's probably like free at that point, running around somewhere. And then I was trying to go downstairs because one of the other babies was downstairs, and you're always trying to find a place to put them, on a chair or something. And I was going down the stairs with Clara in my socks. We had like a spiral staircase to the basement, and I fell down the stairs with Clara. And I had my socks on, and I just remember it's like boom, boom. I'm like, do I have to hit every step? Like boom, 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 like all the way down to the bottom. And I hit my butt hard. Like to this day, it was the biggest bruise. And I was holding her so tight. And then I opened my eyes and I looked down and she was like not even fazed, because I took the brunt of it, But in that moment, I was like, okay, if I would have had to go to the ER, what would have been more important? The laundry? What was on TV? Emails? No. So in that moment, I promised myself, as hard as it is, to try to be present. Because that's how we lose keys. That's how we can't find stuff, because we're just kind of mindless. So we can lose keys, but let's not drop babies. Let's not fall down the steps. But in that moment, I really did try to promise myself that I would be a bit more, not only present, but just aware of my movements, right? If I'm going down the steps, slow down and go down the steps. If I'm talking with them or if I have a conversation, slow down and have the conversation. There was an anecdote I talk about, with grandmama. I think about the things that I cherish. It wasn't the Easter holidays or Christmas. It was like the random Tuesdays, And there was this day I talk about in the book where I was in middle school, and I remember I was in honors English, and she picked me up that day in her Lincoln Continental. On the back, my grandchild is a USD 259 honor student. She was so proud. And my grandmother was the first woman of color on the school board in my town. So she was huge in education. And I guess it was just kind of lost to me because she'd always been on the school board when I was little. And so little did I know, my 7th grade self, she picks me up that day, and I'm in the back of the car, and she's listening to Lou Rawls. I don't know if you guys know who that is. And so she turns down Lou Rawls, and she's like, "What are you saying?" And I said, "I volunteered to go to the easier English class because Jamie is in there, all my friends are in there, and everybody says Mr. McGill-Gray's class is so fun." And Mrs. Moore said that the advanced class was overcrowded, so I volunteered to go to the easy class. I was like, "Grandmama, today was so much fun." And I remember it was like somebody threw a paper wad, and I was like, "This is the best thing that's ever happened to me. This is so fun." And she was like, "What?" And I remember her turning her Lincoln Continental around, and we drove back into Brooks Middle School. She storms into the office, and she's like, "Where's Brenda?" And I'm like, I didn't even know my principal's name was Brenda. And I'm like, "Oh." And she came out, and she said, "Yes, Miss Brown." And she said, "You know better." And the next day, I was back learning about Beowulf and Shakespeare. But I didn't miss a beat because it had only been a day. But it was a fun day in Mr. McGilbray's class. But thank God she was present, and that she was listening. It's so easy when your kids are in the back seat, or your grandkids are in the back seat, or your nieces, your nephews, you're just like, But I'm just happy that she was listening. And I also talk about it because I love my mom, and we're very close, but you can't do it by yourself. And so it's okay that I had a village. I had my grandmother. I had aunts who didn't have children of their own. So they were nurturing for me. That's why I say this book is for anyone who nurtures a child, because so many of those people poured into me. And so I tell that story because I know sometimes it's hard to be as present as we can be. But it's kind of, I hope that if this book is by their bedside or their coffee table, that it's just kind of a reset to see it and just remember to just slow down and to try to be as present as we can be.
Did this work change your definition of what makes a good mother, or reinforce it?
I think I give myself a lot more grace. And I realize that everybody has something. I remember one of my friends said, and I talked about it in the book, I can't remember what one of my kids was going through, but her child had really, really, really severe peanut allergies, period. So she would go to birthday parties, and when all the kids were eating pizza, I would watch her take out the gluten-free one before that was a thing. Or, all the things that moms will do just so that this kid could kind of fit in, And she said, "Sheinelle, every kid has something." Well, what I learned now is that every mom has something. We're all dealing with stuff. And frankly, when life starts lifing, and especially in my case, motherhood gets even harder. Motherhood doesn't stop. If anything, the dial is turned up a little bit. And so I've recognized now what a mighty force we are, how awesome we are, how strong we are, how resilient we are. These women, when you hear some of these women talk about how they clinged to their faith, I can't imagine going to bed and my kids are hungry. And she would just wait and eat the next day, at work if somebody had something. I can't even imagine what that would feel like, for your kids to be hungry, So every mom has something too, but even still, they turned out okay. Like Lin-Manuel Miranda, his mom was telling me, and she's renowned, she's a psychiatrist or psychologist, and she said he would have anxiety sometimes at night, and she would just breathe with him, sit with him, tell me about your day, tell me the best part about your day. He would calm down, And now I think about Hamilton, In the Heights, Moana, the soundtrack to my kids' childhood and our own, And it's But you know what? He had a mom who like would breathe with him, So it's just like, if you're that mom and you're reading this book and you're just like, oh my gosh, my little guy, it's like he's very anxious. I just don't know what to do. Just know it's gonna be okay. Like, you're gonna be okay, ultimately. You're here. Kathy Lee used to say, if you have a pulse, you have a purpose, and I believe that. I've taken that to heart.
Was there a mom that you connected with most?
Oof. They're like your children, they're like each, because I interviewed more, I actually still to this day, I'm like, oh my gosh, I interviewed so many other moms that were amazing. But to be honest, once Uche got sick, I was like, I got 15 chapters, like Sheinelle, like settle down. Like it was, there are so many more. But each of them has something different. Alma was her spunk, or Wanda was her speech to me about not hiding behind your children and not forgetting to have an identity for yourself. And Shaq's mom was about the power of pivoting. Thomas Rhett's mom was about having blended families. Like I could go on and on. Each one of them kind of had something that would linger with me. And so when I set out to write this book, I would take a mom and then I would draft out what about our interview do I hold dear. And that was kind of how I did it. So each mom in this book, you'll see, offers to me something special to kind of check all of the boxes. And even Kay McConaughey, she inspired me because she was the oldest mom. She was 90. And she really did. She thought I was like, I have your husband, your brother, or your son is Matthew McConaughey, because she wanted to be like in the movies. And like she wanted to be, her goal was the Golden Girls. But then and she was like, but seriously, like, do you know someone, And I got the biggest kick out of it because at 90, she's still trying to do stuff. And she was so naughty. Like, she was the naughtiest one. Like, so naughty. To the point where I was so nervous when I sent this book to the editors or to the family members. Like, I wanted to make sure that I had their okay. I thought for sure Matthew would be like, no. But I guess he knows his mom, so I got to keep it. And I'm not going to lie, I kind of reeled it in a little bit for the book because she was naughty. But she talked about the fact that, you know what? You got to have humor too. She was a hoot. I'll just let you read it, but she was naughty. And she just inspired me. I ran a marathon that year because I just felt after that, because I was like, let's do the hard thing. Let's lean into just trying to squeeze the most we can out of the days. Let's challenge ourselves. If she at 90 is still trying to find an agent, like, what am I going to do,
Sheinelle, you went to Northwestern, which we were
Go
talking
Cats,
about.
anybody?
Yeah.
Woo!
So this is full journal. You knew you wanted to be a broadcast journalist, but they have a hardcore writing program regardless.
I saw Peggy Noonan's poster out there, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I took a speech writing class with Nixon's speechwriter. She used to write for Reagan, and like I've studied all of her work, and so to be in that little back room and to see Peggy Noonan's poster, I'm just like, oh my God, it's like this bookstore, it's like the Harvard of bookstores. Anyway.
So what you even knew back then, you wanted to be a broadcast journalist, right? Because you didn't, I'm not a writer. I'm not a writer.
I was so tired of writing. I was like,
so much
I
writing.
just want to talk.
Yeah.
And then I got to Northwestern, and they're like, oh no. The first 2 years, we called it the Medill F.
Yes.
It was just red marks all over your writing.
Yes. So you're a storyteller now. You're a writer. You've always been a writer. What was the process of writing like for you? Because oftentimes people say that if you want to understand something or think through something or solve something, write it, whether it's a journal or an essay or an email.
A lot of the book you would find in the notes section of my iPhone. I would be sitting in the parking lot waiting for Kyan or Uche or one of the kids to finish Clara's music theater. Like, I was in the car, like, waiting for them. The car was like, it's like my second home, I joke, And so while I'm waiting for them at all these practices, and if you have kids in sports, weekends will never be your own until they graduate. And they have to get there an hour early. So you're just in the car. And so I would, I'd write on my cell phone. Or if Uche was around, I would write on my laptop because he was a techie. And I'm like, I just write on my phone. I would say it a lot. Sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night and I would feel something or a thought or something I wanted to say. I wrote the whole intro to this book talking into my phone. I just had it on my heart that morning because the publishers told me that I needed to say something about it. And I didn't know what I wanted to say because I promised Uche like I would protect it was privacy, but I also felt like I couldn't write a book about motherhood and not address it. And so I prayed over it, and sometimes things come to you when you're still. Oprah, the great O, says, if you don't know what to do, be still. And so I found a lot of this book, it came to me when I was still. Even writing the book in the first place was during COVID because we had this like collective pause. And so it gave me a chance to kind of do some like self-assessment, like what would I want to put out into the world? And so for a lot of this book, it would be like, I'd wake up and I'd be like, I think I want to say, and I would just say it into my phone. And then eventually I hired a collaborator. And she would say, just call me and we could talk it through or whatever. And I'm like, but you don't know how I feel. I would be like, you don't know what I got from Alma or whatever. So she said, I'll tell you what, you write the chapter and then you can send it to me and I can give you my thoughts. And so that's what I did with every chapter. I would write it and then I would send it to her and she would be like, oh my gosh, this is great. Or she really pushed me a lot on inserting myself. As a journalist, that's very hard for me to do. I just wanted to focus on the moms, and I didn't want to talk about myself, but she was, she insisted. And so sometimes she would stop it, like with Alma Wahlberg. I'm like, no, the chapter is complete. I wrote her journal entry. This is great writing here, and she said, well, and then she started asking me questions, and she said, doesn't your mom journal? I said, yeah, she's been journaling since I was little. She gets up at 4 a.m, every morning since I was little. She has an array of colored pencils, and she gets up and she'll either use a scripture or she'll see a magazine article. My mom loves books. Our house, only Jenna Bush Hager and my mom read more. Like, it might be a tie for how many books they read. I can't wait till one day, like when they meet, coming up, because she's coming in town tomorrow. I don't know who reads more books, but it's a lot. They both read a lot. But anyway, I grew up with my mom having books everywhere, and she would read something in journal. And the collaborator said, okay, if you're writing a chapter on Alma Wahlberg and her journals, you should call your mom and just ask her. And I'm like, okay. So I remember calling my mom on a Saturday morning, and I'm like, Mom, I'm working on this book. And she's like, uh-huh. And I said, your journals? She's like, yeah. I'm like, Alma said that she wants her kids to read her journals. I said, I don't even know where you keep your journals, because whenever my mom gets another, she loves to go to the bookstore and buy another one, and she just loves it. And so she has like volumes of journals, and I've never once had I thought about what was in them. And I said, would you want me to read your journals one day? She said, oh goodness, no. And I said, well, okay, well, what do you want to do with them then? Because you've got like so many. I mean, she has volumes of journals. And then she kind of got serious on me in a way that she's never done before. And she talked about, when she got a divorce from my father and then a divorce from my second father, like her therapy was writing it down. And, she could put it in the journal and then get up and walk away and start her day. And I just never really thought about that was how she got through. I just looked up and Mom got through like they always do, Or, I remember when we were little, I talk about in the book, we had an unfinished basement in Kansas, and we had, I don't know why, but we had one pair of skates, and I would take a skate, and my sister would take a skate, and we would share. And we would sing, celebrate good, and we would skate in between loads of laundry. We'd skate by the reds, we'd skate by the whites. Never once did it occur to me like to pick them up and put them in a washing machine. They were just a conduit to our enjoyment. And so I remember we'd say, Mom, are our red shorts up yet? Or Mom, and so as if they just magically made their way up the stairs and into the drawer, I know. They did, And I said, Mom, after writing this book, I said, thank you. Like I look back now and I'm like, thank you. I appreciate her more, but I do know that she shielded me from a lot. I think that's something maybe I would do a little differently. Actually, I have no choice now but to be vulnerable with my kids, but she shielded me from it. And so by having this conversation with her about journals, we talked for hours. And my mom we've just never had that kind of a conversation. So it was because of Alma that I had a conversation with my own mom. And then Caroline Clark, the woman I collaborated with, made me put it in the book.
It's beautiful. We have some questions from the audience, but my last question for you is, what do you want your kids to say about you when they describe you as a mom?
Ooh, this is kind of loaded. Not to get too heavy, but my little guy came in the kitchen one day recently. He's 13, boy twin. And he said, Mom, I feel like life is like BC AD. And I said, yeah, that's how they do it in the history books. And he goes, no, before cancer and after death. And I was like, oh. And he's like, do you feel that way? And I said, yeah, I do, buddy, I do. And when I think about being a mother, I kind of see it BC AD, Before, I was just trying to figure out how they were going to get back in Northwestern like their mom and their dad. And, are they in the right school? Or, is Kyan reading enough? Are they reading enough books? Or, my goal was just to get to the point where they could all carry their own backpack at the airport. Like, that was when I was like, I have made it, And now, after writing this book, it's kind of the larger questions. And I want them to know me. I want them to know how I think about things. I think one of the greatest gifts I've ever received, my grandmother wrote our family history. And it's a thick book. And it's got everything about when she met my grandpa, what she thinks about this, that. Like, I know everything about how my grandmother thinks, everything. And it's really special to me now more than ever. And so I do want my kids to know how I think about things. But also, I think I realize a lot of how our kids are, how we are, is based on modeling. And, I remember watching my grandmother grieve my grandfather. He passed a few years ago. And they'd been married for 69 years. She'd been with him since she was 20. And I watched how she moved with such grace when my grandfather passed. He was one of the only Black physicians in my hometown. His father was a physician. So he, was growing up, like most of the kids went to my grandpa, and so he was very well known in my town. And so my grandmother, she was on the school board. So there was a lot of attention in my town on my grandmother. And I just watched how she moved. Little did I know then that a few years later I would be in that same position. And after Uche passed and I was on leave and I knew I was gonna have to go back to work, like I talked about it with Savannah, I was just like swirling for how I wanted to be, and I was like, am I gonna laugh again? Like, I don't want my kids to feel like life just like stopped, because I have friends who lost parents and they would tell me that they remember like things just kind of stopped, and I didn't want that for my kids. And so I had to it was like swimming through mud. And so I remember like Googling and trying to find women that I could think of who had like lost someone, and I would study Jackie Kennedy. I like looked at her and I watched her under her veil, and then I looked at like Coretta Scott King. I remember mentioning it to one of my friends, and she's like, I love Uche, but he's so not Martin Luther King Jr. or JFK, but okay. I'm like, listen, I'm aiming high, okay? But I admired, and now I'm a part of this widow club where I know so many, but I didn't know them then. But I remember seeing how they moved and knowing that I wanted to see my kids carry myself with grace. Like, I knew that part, but I never heard them speak. So I was like doing this deep dive, and there may be one interview with Jackie Kennedy where she was talking with the reporter, I can't remember, and and I was listening to her breathy voice, trying to hear. And I remember, I think it was like shortly after, and so I could hear the sorrow in her voice. But other than that, I couldn't hear anybody. And so I remember again praying about it and being still about it. And then I realized, why? Because Sheinelle, you have to be your own person. You can't be anybody else. And so then I started to say, okay, who is the woman I want to be? Who is the woman I want my kids to see? I'm not it yet. I'm tired, I'm sad, but I'm gonna be that woman until I become that woman. And so they're gonna see a strong mom. They're gonna see a resilient mom. And, I said it before, when I go out to the plaza, I remember my first day back on the show, and everybody was crowded outside, and everybody's looking like at me with these puppy eyes through the window, and I'm like, hi, I'm coming, and I was just like, oh. But I'm like, you know what, the woman I want to be, she would go outside. And she would make eye contact with people, because people just want to share and connect. And I would stay and I would talk with every person. Now I can do it all day, but I just had to get myself there. And so what I noticed is that, like, my kids saw that. And so it's like, I'm going back to work, so you got to go back to school. And not only are you going to go back to school, but my little guy's like, I think I'm going to run for student council. I want you to run for student council. Here's my speech. I want to hear your speech. They see mommy write. I wrote a book. So it's like, we can take our grief and we can take all of those things, but we can still have wins and we can still challenge ourselves. And so I'm trying to model what I want my kids to be: resilient and curious, and approach people with wonder and kindness, and like all of those things, because I recognize that those are the things that ultimately matter.
Oh, is she special?
Do we have Deborah West? Deborah West, your question?
Hello, Sheinelle. Thank you for taking questions. Your resilience, positivity, and grace is so inspiring. How do you recommend mothers or caregivers give advice to their children about finding positivity and pushing forward when life presents you with the most unexpected and difficult circumstances?
Ooh, that's a good question. You know, I start this book by saying there's no template. There's no roadmap. It's sketchy at best. And so there is no template for having 3 teenagers who have just lost their dad. Like a guy's guy. Like this guy, like he would surf and he would ski and snowboard, and he was on 2 soccer teams in New York City. Like he was Nigerian, so he played with like the African diasporan dads, and then he would go play with the like Wall Street dads because he was like in both worlds. And I would have such an attitude because I'm like 2 nights a week you're out just like playing soccer, and I'm here, you know, that kind of thing. And and he was just such a, he was constantly taking the kids. My boys are huge Chelsea fans, so he was taking them to London. And I mean, my little dude went to the World Cup in Russia. And he was, such a Renaissance guy. And so he was such a dad's dad. And I look now and I'm like, God, they may have only had 13 years or 16 years, but they got a lot. But I say that because to lose somebody like that and lose a presence like that is just, it's just an earthquake, even for me, And so how do we come back from that? How do we do that, And the kids know, listen, I'm in it with you, And they'll tell me. There was a time when my little guy was like, or my oldest son was like, do you have to cry on Instagram? Like, do you And I thought, oh, I didn't even notice it, but there were just blurbs or things that would come out and people would repost it. But if you think about it, and I hadn't thought about it at the time, you're 16 and you have your phone, and then every time if you look on my page, like, no one wants to see their mom, tearing all the time. So I've tried to be pretty careful about now what I put on social, just because I know they see it. That's something that the moms I had to interview didn't have to deal with. That's a new, it's like the Wild West now. It truly is. I think them seeing me try to have new wins matters, but ultimately I think we just have to have the conversations. We have to be open and a lot more vulnerable, I think, than my mom or grandmother ever was, but I think it's important for me to be that way with them. In some ways, though, sometimes it's like, no. I got this. I remember Savannah gave me some really good advice. She lost her father when she was 16, so she was Kyan's age. So my kids have really connected, especially Kyan, with her. And there was one time where she said, let him know that he doesn't need to be the man of the house. And because, my kids have African heritage, that happens a lot where it's like, you're the man now, you're this, you're that. And I didn't realize that he was carrying that. And so my son plays the piano. He plays 8 instruments. He's like his dad. But so he was playing, he sits down and he just plays the piano. It's like his stress relief, And I heard him playing one day and I got up and I went in and I sat next to him. I said, just so you know, I got this. You know that, right? Like, I got this. I don't need you to be dad. I need you to be my little guy. I need you to be my 16-year-old. And he goes, So I didn't realize that he'd been carrying that. And that's the beauty of a mom village. It's like it took someone to tell me that. I talk in the book about how, Clara used to sing to herself and I would hear her and I recorded it. And one day I played it during commercial break because the commercial break is where we live. The show kind of gets in the way of our life. And so I was playing Clara singing for Hoda and she was like, oh my God, Sheinelle, you should like put her in something, And I was like, you think so? She's like, yeah. And I mean, of course, my mom does music theater in my hometown. And so I put Clara in music theater, and she was kind of shy. Her first year was Dorothy and the Wiz. She was just a Matilda. She was, an Annie. Like, it's her happy place, that stage. And it literally came from a girlfriend at work, just, from the mom village. So in this book, I was like, I'm about to create the most amazing mom village with younger moms, older moms. Like, I just want to create this, like, tribe. You remember the book, The Purpose-Driven Life? Do you remember that book? Yeah. Well, I remember we got it one year in Sunday school, and I remember reading maybe like the first chapter or so, and I was like, okay, I get it, purpose, right? But I watched people in groups all over the country start to talk about purpose, right? We weren't really talking about wellness and purpose and those kinds of things. Well, my pie in the sky dream is that we use this book to talk about motherhood. And I feel like if we pour into mothers, we're pouring into our kids too. So that's all I can ask for. And again, I hope to model that for my kids. So they will know, I dedicate it to the 3 of them. Like, they will know their mother and what I really, truly care about. Sorry, that was a long answer. I'll make them shorter.
We have time for one more question from Rini Critchell. Are you here? Okay, I will ask it. She asks, is there a moment that you would like a redo?
Like in parenting? Ooh, probably the early years. I kind of don't remember a lot of it. Where was I?
You had twins, yes. I know,
Yeah, you know. I mean, first of all, I took all the pictures, so I'm not in most.
Yeah.
Like Uche, but you know what, though? It all works out because he's in all the pictures. You know, I'm just not in a lot of pictures. You know how women take, like, maternity pictures or, like, I don't have any of that. Like, I just remember one time my stepmom came to the door, and I had on the same Target nursing bra that I'd worn for, like, a month. And I hadn't washed my hair. And I remember her coming to the door and she was like, can you, here, give me the baby and go shower or something, you know? Like, I look at moms now, they're like, have their coffee cups and they're like pushing strollers. Like, they just seem like they, you know, had it together. But I was so worried. I just didn't want to mess him up. I would like prop him up and I would have leaned into knowing that, and I said this in the book, like, God gave this little dude to me. I am the mom that he needs. And I should trust that I am the mom that he needs. He didn't give him to her, he didn't give him to her, he gave him to me. And I am equipped more than I know to be this little guy's mom. And if I would have had that confidence and that a little bit, maybe a little more sleep, but with 3 under 3 that doesn't happen. But I do feel like I would have tried to soak it up a little more. Because I see pictures and they were adorable. But I don't really know where I was.
Blur, yeah.
I was there, but and I was also doing morning TV. Yeah.
Oh my God, girl.
Yeah.
The lack of sleep.
Well, thank you for making us all richer through your stories. We're going to take the group photo now.
Oh, yay.
Oh, it's over.
Thank you guys so much for coming. Thank you.
So we want everyone to hold up your books.
Oh my gosh, this is like...
You too, Sheinelle.
And look at me.
Oh, this is just so overwhelming to me.
So it's like you're taking a selfie, but I'm taking it.
Okay. Thank you guys so much. Thank you.
Look at all that love for you. I loved it.
Thank you.
Thank
Can I
you.
tell Clara picked the cover. Like, we were working on the cover, and it had, like, colorful flowers, and Clara was like, Mom, make the flowers white. So seeing you guys hold it up. Thank you guys
So,
so much.
yes, if you can remain seated so we can let Sheinelle get back to the book signing table.
It's okay. I just feel like there's, like, so many people I don't feel like you're being escorted.
And we have lines for book sales and for book signing. So if you've already gotten your book, you can get on the book signing line.
Overload and it's super special and it's exactly what I dreamed of. Like literally today is exactly all I could say.
Get out of the way, ask the questions.
Oh, yay. Yeah, we're going back to you.
Excellent job. Is that okay? So much love for you. Did you feel it coming in?
Your advice really just, I think, really resonated with everybody. I mean, that was just marvelous. Thank you so much.
Okay. I just feel like something came on the